The great chamber of the Galactic Council was silent, a quiet born from absolute certainty. Holographic stars cast a soft light on the assembled representatives of a dozen advanced species. The topic was routine, resource allocation and expansion. A blue-green world, third from a minor yellow star, hung in the center of the room. Designation: Sol 3. Local name: Earth. The Grand Orator, a being of shimmering light and gentle hum, pulsed with calm authority. The data is conclusive. The dominant species, self-titled humans, have not achieved faster-than-light travel. Their energy grids are planet-bound and inefficient. Their political structures are fractured into hundreds of competing tribes they call nations. They wage small, violent conflicts amongst themselves over concepts and resources. They are, by all our metrics, pre-unification. A classic Type 0 civilization. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Mantorian Shard's representative, a crystalline entity named Catharn, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. Their planet is rich in bioorganic material, liquid water, and accessible heavy metals. Its location is suitable for a quadrant supply depot. The path is clear. There was a single, hesitant objection. The Sylvan, a delicate arboreal species, rustled their leaves. We note a peculiar energy signature in their planetary networks. The density of information exchange is abnormal for their tech level. Could this indicate a hidden capacity? Catharn emitted a dismissive chime. Information without wisdom is noise. They use it for primitive social bonding and tribal storytelling. Our scans show their primary military projectiles are kinetic solid metal propelled by chemical explosions. They have rudimentary fission weapons, which they are wise enough not to use. They pose no threat to a coordinated fleet. Their internal strife makes them weak. The vote was called. It was nearly unanimous. The resolution passed. Sol 3 would be assimilated for the greater resource management of the Council. The Mantorian Shard, renowned for their disciplined warrior forms and powerful energy casters, would lead the pacification. It would be swift. It would be clean. The humans, they believed, would see the logical superiority and surrender, or they would be made to. The Council's mood was one of serene complacency. It was not a declaration of war. It was a scheduling of administrative work. On Earth, in a control room at the Korean Astronomy and Space Science Institute in Daejeon, Minji leaned close to her monitor, her brow furrowed. The data stream was wrong. A cluster of objects had been tracked past the orbit of Jupiter. Their deceleration profile was impossible for natural bodies. They were slowing down. "Jay, come look at this," she said, her voice tight. Jay, a man with a tired face and the focused eyes of a former Air Force analyst, wheeled his chair over. He had left the military for the quieter life of data science, but his mind still worked in patterns of threat assessment. He looked at the spectral analysis and the trajectory plots. His blood ran cold. "These aren't asteroids," he said quietly. "And that's not a comet's signature. They're underpowered deceleration. A fleet." He pulled up a global collaboration network, a secure chat hub for astrophysicists and orbital trackers. The same panic was spreading in fragments from Chile to Sweden to Japan. Unidentified. Controlled movement. Multiple contacts. Large. Within hours, the things were visible to high-end amateur telescopes. They were sleek, angular, and reflected light in ways no human satellite did. They took up positions around the moon, a silent, menacing cordon. Then, they broadcast their message. It wasn't a complex signal. It pierced every satellite feed, every radio band, every television and phone network on the planet. A voice, synthesized and chillingly calm, spoke in perfect, accented Korean, English, Mandarin, Spanish, every language at once. "People of Earth, you are a fractured and primitive species. Your planet is now a protectorate of the Galactic Council of Unified Species. You will cease all military activities and global communications. You will await the arrival of Mantorian overseers for pacification and integration. You have one of your planetary rotations to signal global surrender. Resistance is illogical. You will be obliterated. The world held its breath, then erupted into chaos. The Council, observing from afar, saw exactly what they expected to see. They saw the news channels blaring panic. They saw social media networks flood with fear and misinformation. They saw some world leaders calling for calm and others calling for defiant, if futile, retaliation. They saw the beautiful blue planet descend into a satisfying tapestry of disorder. It confirmed every assumption. What did we tell you? Catharn hummed to the Sylvan representative in a side channel. Look at them. They are already defeating themselves. Their unity is a fiction. On the ground, the chaos was real, but it was not the whole story. Jay stared at the frozen image of the alien vessel on his screen, the ultimatum still ringing in his ears. Fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, a familiar, analytical fire sparked, fractured, primitive, illogical. The words were meant to demoralize. He heard something else. Arrogance. He opened a new, heavily encrypted window. Not the official channels, which were already jammed or compromised. This was a gray web, a back-channel network built by hackers, gamers, and data pack rats like himself. It was called the Nexus. Its original purpose was to share open-source code and bypass firewalls for streaming sports. Now it lit up with a single pulsing urgency. Minji watched him, her face pale. What are you doing? They said to cease communications. They said a lot of things, Jay muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They want us to be quiet and scared. That is the first thing we should not do. He typed a simple message and broadcast it to every known Nexus node. They are watching our main channels. They see our fear. Stop using them. Fall back to prearranged local nets. Record everything they do. Every ship movement, every energy signature. Share it here. Do not attack. Watch, learn. In a military bunker outside Seoul, Captain Suhayan of the Cyber Command read a version of that message on a different, more secure military gray net. She was a sharp, precise woman who had trained for cyber attacks from China, from Russia. This was different. Her orders from above were conflicted and slow. But Jay's basic idea was sound. Observe. Adapt. Do not fight on their terms. She called her team. Forget trying to breach their firewalls. It's like a child trying to hack a bank. Instead, I want to fill their lobby with noise. Find every public broadcast frequency they are using for scanning or communication. We are going to send them a data dump. Of what, Captain? A young lieutenant asked. Of everything, Suhayan said, a grim smile touching her lips. Every public domain text we have. War manuals. Philosophy books. Pop music lyrics. Television static. Send it all, in a loop on their own frequencies. Don't try to make sense. Just overwhelm their receivers. If they're so advanced, let them sort through our chaos. In a small apartment in Bizen, Taemin was also not surrendering. He was terrified, but his hands moved on instinct. Before him, spread across his living room floor, were the tools of his hobby, first-person view racing drones. Dozens of them. Fast, agile, and nearly invisible to radar. He looked out his window at the city, then at the news feed showing the same alien message. They would come here. To the cities. A wild idea formed. He opened his local community chat, a group usually used for finding lost pets or complaining about noise. He typed drone pilots. Anyone with a drone, racing, or camera, meet me at the old warehouse district. Don't ask. Just come. Bring all your batteries. The Council's sensors detected the surge in low-powered, short-range microwave transmissions across the planet. They categorized it as panic chatter and tribal coordination. It was beneath their notice. The important thing was that no unified planetary response had emerged. No single leader had accepted their terms. This was, to them, merely a delay. Catharn gave the order. The grace period is over. They cling to their tribal loyalties. Begin the pacification drops. Target their major population and industrial centers. Show them the cost of illogic. The great Mantorian ships, hanging in the lunar shadow, opened their bays. Hundreds of drop pods, sleek and terrifying, ignited their drives and fell toward the bright blue planet like a shower of deadly stones. The invasion had begun. The Council watched, their complacency a warm certainty. They had voted to invade Earth. The humans were reacting with predictable, pathetic disorder. The next phase would be simple. They had no idea what they had just started. The Mantorian drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, trailing fire like falling stars. They were designed to be terrifying, to crack open on impact and release perfect, crystalline warrior forms that shone with lethal energy. Their targets were the great nerve centers of human civilization, capitals, ports, communication hubs. In Seoul, the air raid sirens howled a sound no one had heard in living memory. People ran for shelters, for basements, for anywhere that felt safe. Captain Soo Hyun did not run. She stood in her command center, a room humming with computers and tension. Her team looked at her, young faces pale under the fluorescent lights. They are descending on Itaewon and Yongsan districts, a lieutenant said, voice shaky. Should we activate the countermeasures? Not yet, Soo Hyun said, her eyes on a map of the city covered in blinking red dots. Wait for them to land. Let them think it's easy. The pods landed not with explosions, but with a series of heavy, earth-shaking thuds. Hatches hissed open. The Mantorian warriors emerged. They were tall, their bodies made of interlocking purple crystal that refracted the city lights. They held weapons that glowed with a soft, dangerous light. They moved in perfect, silent unison, a squad of 10 beginning to march down the main street. They expected to see fleeing crowds. They expected to see soldiers in uniform forming lines to fight them. They expected a centralized enemy. What they saw was an empty street. Storefronts were shuttered. Cars were abandoned. The only sound was the distant siren. The lead warrior, its thought processes clean and logical, registered this as surrender. It sent a pulse to its squad. Proceed to the central command node. The tribe has capitulated. Then the noise began. It was not the noise of weapons. It was a deafening, screaming wall of sound. From every speaker still connected to power from apartment windows, from parked cars, from cell phones left on balconies, came a torrent of audio. It was a chaotic mix of traditional pansori singing, deafening heavy metal rock music, news broadcasts from 50 years ago, and the screeching static of white noise. The volume was physically painful, a solid wave of meaningless vibration. The Mantorians stopped. Their sensitive auditory sensors were overloaded. The chaotic data stream, so different from their own harmonious communication, caused a flicker of disorientation in their shared mental link. This was not a weapon. This was nonsense. At that moment, Soo Hyun gave the order. Now, flood their frequency. Her team sent the prepared data dump. It was not an attack on their systems. It was like throwing a library into a person's face. Thousands of public domain books, every meme from the global internet, weather reports from across the planet, and children's television shows, all compressed and blasted directly at the Mantorians' open command frequency. The crystalline warriors staggered. Their systems, designed for clear battlefield data, tried to process the flood. For a few seconds, they were paralyzed, trying to translate the screaming music and the pictures of cartoon characters. That was when the windows opened. Not to fire guns, but to shine lights. Hundreds of powerful laser pointers, the kind used in offices or bought by children, focused on the warriors from every direction. The beams did no damage, but they covered the gleaming crystal bodies in dazzling, shifting dots of light, completely obscuring their vision sensors. The squad leader tried to order a suppression fire. But to fire at what? The sound was coming from everywhere. The lights were coming from everywhere. There was no single enemy to target. For the first time, a flicker of something illogical entered its mind. Confusion dot in Bizen. The drop pods landed near the port. Taemin watched from a rooftop, his heart pounding against his ribs. He saw the crystalline forms emerge. He took a deep breath, put on his FPV goggles, and whispered into his headset microphone. Okay, swarm pattern 3. Go, go, go. From alleys and rooftops and parked vans, a cloud of drones rose. Not military drones. Racing drones, fast and agile like angry hornets. Camera drones, smaller and quieter. Toy drones from department stores. Over 300 of them, piloted by teenagers, delivery guys, and hobbyists like him. They did not carry explosives. They carried things from the hardware store, thick strings of industrial glue, nets of fine steel wire, and cans of spray paint. The Mantorians looked up as the buzzing cloud descended. They raised their weapons and fired brilliant lances of energy. A dozen drones exploded into plastic and flame. But for every one hit, 10 more zipped in. They swooped low, trailing strings of glue that splattered across the warriors' crystal limbs. They dropped nets of thin wire that snagged on their sharp edges. They flew directly at their heads, spraying opaque black paint across their visual sensors. A warrior fired wildly, melting a hole in a cargo container. Another spun, trying to shake off a drone that was stubbornly painting its sensor lens black. The perfect formation broke down into a chaotic dance of stumbling, blinded giants swatting at tiny, annoying insects. One warrior, tangled in steel wire and glued to the ground, fell over with a sound like shattering chandeliers. Taemin guided his own custom racing drone in a high-speed arc. He saw a Mantorian's back where crystalline plates met. There was a faint glow. An energy port. He dove. His drone, with a small piece of magnetized scrap metal taped to it, slammed into the port and stuck. The warrior shuddered, a spark of erratic energy coursing over its body. It wasn't destroyed, but it was shut down, twitching on the ground dot in the countryside. Sergeant Seok and his Marine squad watched a single drop pod land in a rice paddy. Their orders had been to regroup at a central point. Seok had ignored them. He knew this land. He'd grown up here. No uniforms, he said. Civvy clothes, farmers. They are looking for soldiers. So we will not be soldiers. They hid their rifles in a truck. They put on hats and old jackets. When the 2 Mantorian scouts moved through the village, they saw only what appeared to be terrified old men and women hiding. The warriors moved on, towards the supposed military signal coming from the nearby town. B. OM-SEOK and his men let them pass. Then they moved. They didn't attack the warriors. They went to the drop pod. It was still warm, humming with a low energy. They had no way to hack it, so they used physical tools. They pried open an access panel with a crowbar. Inside were pulsing crystals and shimmering wires. Think it's like an engine, one private said. Then we cool it down, Seok replied. They used the high-pressure water pump from the local fire truck. They shoved the hose into the open panel and turned it on. Icy well water flooded the interior. There was a violent crackle, a shower of sparks, and the pod went dark. They had not killed an enemy. They had stranded two and taken away their ride home. Across the world, similar scenes played out. The Mentorians found no grand army. They found a world that fought like a ghost. They found roads suddenly blocked by seemingly accidental truck crashes. They found their navigation signals corrupted by simple radio jammers built from old cell phones. They found that the humans used their own environment as a weapon, luring them into narrow streets where they could be trapped, or under power lines that were suddenly overloaded. Back on the council ship, Cathar watched the data feeds. The initial reports of successful landings had given way to a torrent of confusing, fragmented updates. Energy expenditures were high. Enemy casualties were unconfirmed. Human military resistance was minimal. Yet, pacification was not proceeding. A tactical image appeared. It showed one of their finest warrior units in the middle of a city street, standing perfectly still, covered in hundreds of tiny shining dots of light, while nonsensical human audio screamed around them. What? What is happening to them? The Sylvan representative asked, their leaves trembling. Catharn's crystalline form darkened with anger and disbelief. They are being annoyed. Complacency curdled into confusion, and confusion hardened into a cold, crystalline fury. On the command ship hovering in the moon's shadow, Kytharn reviewed the disaster. The humans were not fighting a war. They were committing what looked like galaxy-wide vandalism. Pacification was stalled on every continent. Reports were maddening. Warriors were not falling to energy weapons, but to obstructions. A squad in a place called London was immobilized by a sudden, deep flood of a sticky, sweet, carbonated liquid from a breach storage facility. Their joints had fused. In Mumbai, their sensitive thermal sensors had been blinded by clouds of incredibly potent pepper spray, deployed by small drones. The humans fought with tools, not weapons. Kytharn made a logical decision. The annoying, decentralized resistance was a product of the humans' chaotic social structure. The solution was to decapitate it. They would target the visible symbols of tribal leadership and infrastructure, destroy the landmarks, break the communication towers, and the primitive hive mind would collapse into helpless panic. The order went out. The orbiting ships powered up their primary energy casters. Beams of focused, continent-scorching power were not for ground combat. They were for strategic elimination. On Earth, Jay saw it coming. The global nexus was a storm of information, but one pattern emerged from the chatter shared by Minji and her astronomy friends. The big ships were moving, aligning, and their energy signatures were spiking to terrifying levels. They're not aiming at armies, Jay said, his voice flat over the secure line to Captain Suhayan. They're charging city-killer beams. They're going to burn Seoul, Tokyo, Washington. To make a point. Suhayan was quiet for a moment. Then we don't let them make that point. A new kind of order went out across the gray nets. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about showing them something. In every targeted city, people did not flee deeper into shelters. They went out. In Seoul, as the great alien ship high above oriented its lethal focus, people poured into the streets. Not soldiers. Ordinary people. They carried nothing but mirrors. Large vanity mirrors, polished sheets of metal, the reflective covers of old hard drives, even CDs strung together. They stood on rooftops, on balconies, in parks, and on mountainsides, holding them up to the sky. The Mentorian ship fired. A lance of brilliant, blue-white energy screamed down from the heavens. It struck the heart of the city. And it splashed thousands of mirrors, angled by thousands of desperate, trembling hands, caught the edge of the beam. They didn't reflect it back. That was impossible with such crude tools. But they diffused it. They scattered it. A single, clean, obliterating beam became 100 smaller, wilder beams of reflected energy. It carved gouges in streets and set buildings on fire. It was devastating. But it was not the clean, surgical erase the Mantorians had planned. The city core still stood. The strike had been messy, inefficient. The humans had used light itself as a shield. From orbit, the data was baffling. The energy discharge was correct, but the thermal result was inconsistent with a direct hit. It was as if the city had. Glittered dot on the ground, Sergeant BMC Oak watched the smoke rise from a distance. His squad was now something else. They were a repair crew. The Mantorians, frustrated, had started targeting power grids and communication hubs. They would slice through a major transformer station with a precise beam and move on, expecting to plunge a region into darkness and silence. B.E.O. Masiak's team arrived at such a station an hour later. The alien beam had cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. The young private, a former electrical engineering student named Ji Hyan, let out a low whistle. It's clean. Too clean. No residual radiation. Just a cut. Can we fix it? BMC Oak asked. Not fix, Ji Hyan said, her eyes already calculating. But we can bypass. It's just a physical break. We don't have the parts to rebuild their fancy stuff. But we have miles of old-fashioned copper cable and a lot of duct tape. They worked for 6 hours under the gray sky. They didn't rebuild the shattered modern transformer. They rigged a chaotic, ugly spider web of heavy cables around the damage, connecting the broken lines directly to each other. It was unsafe. It was inefficient. It would never pass a safety inspection. But when they threw the master switch, held together with a scrap of rubber and hope, the lights in the nearby town flickered back on. Across the world, this became the new fight. The Mantorians would make a precise, advanced cut. Humans would respond with a crude, fast, and effective patch. They used steam engines to power generators when nuclear plants were hit. They used human runners and motorcycle couriers where fiber optics were severed. They downgraded their technology on the fly, becoming a less advanced but far more resilient opponent. Every precise blow from the aliens was met with a messy, adaptive bandage. The true innovation, however, came from Daejin. Hana, the chemical engineer who had worked with Minji, had been studying the debris from a downed Mantorian scout. She held a shard of the purple crystal. It was incredibly hard, but it had a structure, a crystalline lattice. She also had the readouts from the energy weapons. They worked by channeling power through that same lattice. An idea, terrible and simple, formed in her mind. She didn't need to break the crystal. She just needed to gum up the works. She turned her small lab into a workshop. She mixed polymers, aerosols, and a fine conductive powder. The result was a thick, sticky, gray goop in a pressurized canister. It looked unimpressive. She called Jay. I need a test. I need to get this onto an active warrior. Its energy systems need to be running. Jay contacted Tae Min in Bizen. Can your drones deliver a payload? A spray. Tae Min looked at the canister specs. It's heavy, but for a close pass. Maybe one drone. One shot. The next day, a lone Mantorian warrior patrolled a quiet dockyard. It was alert, having learned the hard way about swarming drones. A single racing drone, larger than usual, zipped from behind a container. The warrior turned and fired instantly. The shot clipped the drone's tail, sending it into a spin. But before it crashed, the pilot, a friend of Tae Min's, hit the release. The canister tumbled through the air, spraying its gray goop in a wild arc. Most of it missed. A large glob landed directly on the warrior's chest crystal, right over its main energy conduit, The warrior looked down at the substance. It was non-explosive, non-corrosive. It began to harden on contact with air, forming a tough, conductive seal over the crystal. The warrior took a step, then another. Then it raised its arm to fire at the crashed drone. A spark jumped from its weapon to the hardened goop. The substance, designed to be slightly more conductive than the crystal lattice, created a short circuit. Energy meant for the weapon bled across the warrior's own chest. There was a sharp crack like ice breaking, and a web of fractures appeared in the purple crystal beneath the goop. The warrior froze, its internal systems in catastrophic feedback. It fell, not with an explosion, but with the sound of 1,000,000 tiny fractures. A statue brought down by Gum. When Kytharn received the report, the description of the weapon made no sense. It was not a kinetic impact, not an energy weapon. It was a contaminant. The humans were not just fighting them. They were soiling them. They were treating the Mantorian shard's perfect biological forms like a dirty engine to be clogged. The Sylvan representative's voice was a whisper in the command chamber. They adapt too quickly. They do not improve our weapons. They degrade our weapons with theirs. They are pulling us down to their level. Kytharn felt a vibration of pure rage. This was illogical. It was dishonorable. It was wrong. The Council's clean, efficient war was gone. In its place was a frustrating, dirty, chaotic brawl. And the humans, with their mirrors and glue and dirty chemical sprays, were winning it. The clean, silent space of the Council command ship now felt different. It was filled with a new, unpleasant sensation. Tension. Kytharn watched the holographic displays. They showed no sweeping victories. They showed 100 small, confusing defeats. Their warriors were not being outgunned. They were being outthought by a species that used its own chaos as a weapon. The humans had turned the planet into a hostile, unpredictable environment specifically for them. On Earth, the resistance was solidifying. It was not a government. It was a network. Jay, in his bunker filled with whirring computers, had become a nervous system node. Data flowed to him from Minji's orbital tracking, from Suhayan's cyber units, from field reports like BMCOX. He looked for patterns not in the aliens' strength, but in their rhythm. They communicate constantly, he said to Suhayan over a scratchy connection. Their squads, their ships, their command. It's a tight, fast network. They think as one. That's their strength. And their weakness, Suhayan finished. She had been studying the fragments of their signals. It's like a perfect chorus. If one voice goes off key, can we make it go off key? Jay asked. Suhayan allowed herself a thin smile. We've been sending them noise. But noise is just static. What if we sent them a story? The idea began to form. The humans' greatest industry was not war. It was culture. Stories, music, art, ideas, the very things the Council saw as primitive tribal bonding. That would be the weapon. A global call went out across the Nexus. It was not a call for soldiers, but for archivists, filmmakers, musicians, and writers. In a fortified studio in the remains of a broadcasting building, a woman named Yuna took charge. Before this, she had made documentaries about street food and traditional music. Now, her team had a new mission. We are not making a propaganda film, she told her exhausted but focused crew. We are making a mirror. We are going to show them what they are fighting. Collect everything. Not just the heroic shots. The ugly stuff too. The tears, the anger, the mistakes. The whole messy truth of us. Meanwhile, Jay and Minji worked on the delivery system. The alien ships used a form of faster-than-light communication. It was based on quantum harmonics, far beyond human tech. But Minji had noticed something. When they sent a wide-beam command to their ground forces, there was a faint, Precise resonance a carrier wave. We can't create that wave, Minji said, pointing at her spectral analysis. But for a few seconds, when they broadcast, we can. Echo it. We can hijack the frequency and piggyback our own signal onto it. With what power? Jay asked. It would take a planetary energy grid. A new voice joined the conversation over the comm. It was Hana, the chemical engineer. We don't need to power the signal from here. We just need to launch it into their stream, like a leaf into a river. Their own network power will carry it. But to launch it, we need a burst. A single, huge burst of electromagnetic energy from the surface. Jay understood. We need a planet-sized flashbulb. The plan was insane. It required perfect timing and every remaining bit of coordinated power humanity could muster. They would use everything. The last functional power plants. The capacitors from destroyed wind farms. The batteries from electric vehicle charging stations. Even the drained cells from millions of smartphones collected in makeshift bins. All wired together into a crude global network. On Yuna's signal, they would discharge it all at once, not as an attack, but as a carrier wave. The target was not a ship. It was the main communications relay ship, a delicate, spindly vessel that hung back from the battle, linking the invasion force to the Council and to each other. The day came. The Mantorians, sensing a lull in the annoying human resistance, planned a new, overwhelming show of force. Catharn himself prepared to send a fleet-wide command for a synchronized city-leveling strike. It was to be the final, logical move to end the illogical conflict. On Earth, Yuna gave the signal. Her final cut was not a movie. It was a sensory flood. A 10-second package. It contained a baby's first cry, the scream of a soldier under fire, the sound of a symphony orchestra tuning, farmer laughing in the rain, the roar of a rocket launch, the silent grief at a haw, graveside images of ancient pyramids and gleaming skyscrapers, scenes of terrible wars and of people helping each other after. Earthquakes dot the words, why, and no, and stay, in 1,000 languages. It ended with a single, unedited clip from Seoul days earlier. An old man, standing on a rooftop with a cooking pot lid, desperately reflecting a speck of alien energy as the beam burned around him. His face a mask of pure, defiant terror. This was the package, across the globe. In hidden substations and makeshift battery arrays, technicians threw switches. The last stored energy of human civilization, meant for lights, for heat, for comfort, was unleashed in one focused pulse. It shot upward, a silent, invisible scream of raw power. At that exact moment, Catharn sent his final order. The relay ship opened its quantum channel, a doorway of perfect, ordered data. The human pulse struck the channel's outer edge. It did not break it. It imprinted upon it. Yuna's data package, carried on the back of humanity's final shout, was injected directly into the heart of the Mantorian collective network. On the command ship, Catharn saw the order send. Then his mind was filled with the scream. It was not a sound. It was a conceptual explosion. The clean, logical parameters of the Mantorian mind were flooded with the chaotic, emotional, contradictory storm of the human experience. They felt the raw, illogical terror of the old man with the pot lid. They felt the crushing grief and the wild joy, the destructive hatred and the selfless love, all at once, all jumbled together. For a species whose consciousness was a shared, harmonious crystal, this was the equivalent of throwing a bucket of mud and nails into a perfect symphony. The relay ship systems overloaded, trying to process the incompatible data. It sparked, then went dark. The network connecting the invasion force shattered. On the ground, a Mantorian warrior froze in the middle of raising its weapon. The constant, reassuring hum of the collective was gone. For the first time in its existence, it was alone with its own thoughts. And those thoughts were now contaminated with a haunting, confusing echo. The face of the old human, refusing to fall, chaos, real and profound, erupted in the alien ranks. Simultaneously, high above Earth, Lieutenant Ji-hoon sat in the cockpit of the Gambit. It was not a warship. It was a converted orbital construction pod, armored with scrap metal and armed with a single old space station thruster. His squadron was made of similar junk, old satellite tugs, a repurposed cargo shuttle, anything that could fly in vacuum. Their mission was suicide. They knew it. As the alien relay ship flickered and died, its protective shield wavered for a second. Now, Ji-hoon yelled, his voice cracking. The Gambit and its ragged fleet ignited their engines. They did not fire weapons they didn't have. They were the weapons. They flew straight at the relay ship, a desperate, clumsy charge. Alien point defense lasers tore them apart. One after another, the makeshift ships exploded into silent flowers of flame and debris. Ji-hoon's co-pilot, a young mechanic named Day, was crying but kept his hand steady on the throttle. They were the last. Chunks of metal from their friends' ships pinged off their hull. An energy beam sheared off their portside thruster. The Gambit spun out of control. Aim it. Ji-hoon screamed, wrestling with the controls. Day, with sheer brute force, jammed the metal bar into the steering mechanism, locking the spin. The dying Gambit, a lump of burning scrap, was now on a direct collision course. It struck the relay ship, not at the heavily armored core, but at a delicate-looking array of antennae. There was no giant explosion. There was a crumpling of metal, a shower of sparks, and then the relay ship tumbled silently, its lights winking out forever. The battlefield fell into a strange quiet. The invasion force was still there, but it was blind, deaf, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. The humans on the planet below had just severed their tether and screamed their story into their minds. Kytharn floated in his chamber, the harmonious light of his form now flickering erratically. The comforting hum of the council was gone, replaced by a silent, echoing question from 1,000 human voices. Why? The complacency was not just destroyed. It was replaced by a deep, unsettling fear. They had come to conquer a planet. They had instead opened a door into the chaotic human soul, and they could not close it. Silence. It was the most terrifying sound Kytharn had ever experienced. The constant, flowing stream of data from the council, from the fleet, from the warriors, a hum, as natural as his own thoughts, was gone. It had been severed by a junk heap manned by screaming humans and replaced with a psychic storm. Echoes of human emotions, raw and confusing, bounced around the isolated networks of his ship. He could still see the old man's defiant eyes. He could still hear the baby's cry. The data was meaningless, yet it clung. On the planet below, the change was immediate. The Mantorian warriors, cut off from their collective hive mind, froze. Their perfect coordination shattered. Some stood completely motionless, like machines waiting for a command that would never come. Others moved in jerky, confused patterns, firing their energy weapons at shadows or at the ground. The imposing, unified army had become a collection of isolated, frightened individuals. The weaponized chaos the humans had thrown at them was now their own internal state. Sergeant Seok and his squad observed this from a ridge. One warrior below was repeatedly walking into a concrete wall, backing up and walking into it again, as if its navigation system was broken. They're lost. Ji Hyan, the engineering student, whispered. Their network is down. It's like they've had their brains unplugged. Seok keyed his radio. New orders. Do not engage unless fired upon. Let them be lost, and See if any of them will listen. It was a strange new phase of the war. Humans emerged not with weapons, but with speakers. They broadcast simple, slow words on loop. Lay down your weapon. You will not be harmed. They showed images of other warriors, sitting dazed but unhurt, being given water. The offer was not born of mercy alone, but of a cold understanding. A trapped, desperate enemy fights to the death. A confused one might be neutralized. Some warriors, drowning in alien feelings and silence, saw the logic of surrender for the first time as individuals. They let their weapons fall, the glow fading from their crystals. They were led away, not to cells, but to Faraday cages rooms lined with metal that blocked all signals. For them, the silence was finally complete and a relief. But the main fleet still hung in orbit, a dormant threat. On Earth, the work was not over. Jay, his eyes red from lack of sleep, knew the silence wouldn't last. The Council would send another ship, or this fleet would reboot. Humanity's one defiant shout needed to be a lasting message. Una, the filmmaker, had the answer. "We sent them our heart," she said, her voice hoarse. "Now we send them our history and our receipt." Using the last dregs of restored power, she and a global team prepared a new broadcast. This one was not a chaotic emotional flood. It was a curated, cold, and devastating presentation. It was designed for the Galactic Council, and they would use the old communication satellites, the ones the aliens considered primitive and harmless, to beam it out towards the stars on a repeating loop on the Council's homeworld. The sudden loss of the Sol 3 expedition was a shock that reverberated through the ruling chambers. Arguments broke out. De Sylvan's warning about abnormal information density was now recalled with dread. Before they could decide on a response, a signal arrived. It was on a basic electromagnetic frequency, simple to receive. It was from Earth. The Grand Orator convened the Council. They watched. The transmission began not with a leader, but with the Galactic Council's own ultimatum: surrender or be obliterated. Then, it showed what came next. It showed the drop pods falling. It showed the mirrored defense of Sol, the energy beams scattering like broken glass. It showed Tae-Min's drone swarm, covering warriors in paint. It showed Beam-Seok's team watering down a drop pod's engine. It showed Hana's conductive goop, causing a warrior to shatter. It was edited clearly, clinically. Each clip was a lesson. You did this. We responded like this. Then it showed the conceptual attack. It explained, with calm translated narration, how humanity had turned its own chaotic nature into a weapon and injected it into their perfect network. It showed the Gambit's final, desperate charge. It showed the relay ship going dark. Finally, the screen showed Captain Su Hyan. She sat in a plain room, still in her rumpled uniform. She did not smile. She did not frown. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze unwavering. "You voted to invade Earth," she said, her voice clear and without malice, as if stating a simple fact. "You assessed us as weak because we are not one thing. You saw our arguments and called it division. You saw our creativity and called it chaos. You were wrong." The image shifted to show the silent, captured Nantorian warriors sitting calmly. "Your complacency has ruined your fleet. It has stranded your soldiers. It has exposed a fatal flaw in your understanding of the universe. You believe unity is strength. We have shown you that diversity is resilience. You believe logic is supreme. We have shown you that unpredictability is a shield." The image now showed a wide shot of Earth from space, beautiful and whole. "We did not ask for this fight. You brought it, and in bringing it, you have taught us about yourselves. We have learned how to fight you. We have learned how to break you. We have learned how to talk to you." Su Hyan leaned forward slightly, So listen. This planet and every soul on it is now under our protection. Your soldiers here will be treated with a dignity you did not plan for us. They will be returned to you when we have a guarantee of your peaceful behavior. Approach this world again with respect, or be ruined entirely. We are humanity. We are now your neighbors. The rules have changed. Act accordingly. The transmission ended. The council chamber was utterly silent. The grand orator's light pulsed slowly, dimly. The Sylvan's leaves were curled tightly in on themselves. The representatives looked at each other, not with the calm certainty of rulers, but with the dawning horror of students who had just failed a vital test. Their complacency wasn't just broken. It was replaced by a chilling new calculation. They had not tried to conquer a primitive tribe. They had provoked a hyper-adaptive, collective intelligence that weaponized culture and turned every weakness into a trap. They had given humanity a common enemy, and in doing so, had unified them in the most terrifying way possible. Catharn, alone on his command ship, received the same transmission. He watched his own failed invasion laid bare. He saw the human defiance made into a teaching tool. A deep fracture, not of crystal, but of certainty, formed within him. They had not been defeated by a greater power. They had been outthought by a different kind of mind. The war was over. He opened a channel on an old frequency, sending a single, unencoded word towards the planet below. Ceasefire. On a hill overlooking Seoul, Jay and Minji stood together in the early morning light. The sirens were silent. The sky was clear of falling pods. They were exhausted, hollowed out. Do you think they'll listen? Minji asked. Her voice small. Jay watched the sunrise glint off the broken windows of the city. For now, they're scared. Not of our guns, but of what we are. We just showed them that every human, from a baby to an old man with a pot lid, is a piece of a weapon they don't understand. He put an arm around her shoulders. The fight was over, but the world was different. The quiet was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a standoff. Humanity had not won a war in the traditional sense. They had forced a stalemate by being more disturbingly, creatively alive than their enemies had ever imagined possible. The vote to invade. Earth had been meant to be a simple administrative step. Instead, it had shattered the old galactic order. The Council's smug, complacent peace was ruined. And in its place, hanging in the silent space between stars, was a new and unsettling truth. Humanity was here, and they were infinitely more dangerous than anyone had ever dreamed.